My name is Olivia Bennett, and I'm 42 years old. Until yesterday, I was a lead strategy consultant at Hartley & Knox, a mid-sized consulting firm in Chicago. 11 years. 11 years I spent at that company, weathering mergers, power shifts, economic downturns, and rebrands. I wasn't just a number on the payroll, no. I was one of the pillars, the person they called in critical moments when a deal hung by a thread. The one who stood her ground when clients were ready to terminate the relationship. And then, yesterday morning, I walked into the conference room, anticipating well-deserved handshakes and maybe a modest toast in my honor. But instead, my boss, Ethan Carter, was already sitting at the head of the long glass table. In front of him lay a perfectly aligned, thin white file. "Olivia," he said, rising to meet me. His voice was suspiciously soft, too soft. "The way people talk to you at a funeral. Thank you for coming in so early." And I had just pulled a $20 million contract out of the fire. For 3 weeks, I'd been working myself to the bone, flying nonstop between Dallas and San Francisco, keeping a wavering client from falling into the abyss after a supply chain disruption nearly buried their expansion plans. My efforts didn't just save the deal, they kept the client from fleeing altogether. Everyone in the office understood that. So, when I sat down and noticed Ethan avoiding my gaze, a premonition struck me. There was tension in the air, a subtle shift in something I couldn't yet define. He interlaced his fingers. "You've done an amazing job," he began, "but we're moving in a direction of younger, fresher energy." The words barely registered. "Excuse me?" I managed, not because I didn't hear him, but because the phrase sounded sickeningly rehearsed, like something out of a cheap HR training video. Ethan slid the folder across the table. "We're restructuring. The new leadership is aiming for a leaner team, more aggressive growth strategies. You've been a valuable asset, Olivia, but it's time for a new chapter." I slowly opened the folder, skimming the legal jargon through a haze I desperately tried to hide from him. A severance agreement, a payout, a non-disclosure clause. I looked up, effective immediately. He gave a short nod, as if tapping a tap dance on the lid of my career's coffin. "Of course, we'll pay the quarterly bonus and ensure a respectful transition." A respectful transition? As if you could respectfully throw someone out after 11 years of loyal service. Not a tear. Not a single raised voice. No begging for explanations. Just a smile. A small, strained, but controlled smile. "I understand," I said evenly, as if taking a coffee order, and held out my hand. Ethan seemed to exhale with relief as he shook it. Probably afraid of a tantrum, a scene. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. Because what overwhelmed me wasn't anger, but an icy, piercing clarity. The kind that comes when the veil of a long illusion finally tears. He didn't know it. Not yet. And he had no idea what exquisite pleasure I would take tomorrow. I gathered my things from the desk slowly, with manic methodicalness. Not because I needed the time, but because I wanted it. I longed to see their faces when they realized I was leaving. Not sympathy in their eyes, confusion. The announcement hadn't been made yet. Most assumed I was off to a client meeting. Some waved goodbye. And only one person stopped to ask. "Vacation?" Priya, my assistant, asked, her voice filled with curiosity as she noticed the box in my hands. "Something like that," I replied evasively, trying not to betray the storm of emotions raging inside. I hesitated, lingering on the corner window that had witnessed so many sleepless nights. From here, there was a familiar but no less depressing view, the endless expanse of the lake, the blurred horizon, and the ever-towering crane continuing to erect structures that no one needed. How much effort and time had been invested in this place? I worked in this office during the holidays, sacrificed loved ones' birthdays, stayed late, unafraid of snowstorms. And for what? Respect? Loyalty? Obviously, these concepts no longer held weight in the world of Hartley & Knox. Casting one last glance at the board in my office, I involuntarily lingered on the notes taken during a conversation with our largest client, Cascade Systems. The very client I pulled from the abyss by proposing a strategy that everyone initially considered insanely risky. The client who just a couple of nights ago personally expressed his gratitude and mentioned his visit to Chicago next week to discuss a long-term contract. He didn't yet suspect my departure, and that gave me a small but important advantage. I left the building quietly, without a fuss. No farewell speeches, fake smiles, or sickly sweet cake. Just a quiet exit and a phone overflowing with contacts I'd built myself, year after year, brick by brick. At home, as dusk settled outside, I poured myself a glass of wine. A deep breath, and the laptop lid was open. I reread my contract one last time, carefully searching for a catch. There it was, the non-compete clause. But what luck! It was worded surprisingly softly, only 6 months, and only if I resigned voluntarily. And Ethan had signed my termination letter with his own hand. That changed everything. With anticipation, I opened my personal archives, copies of presentations, notebooks filled with notes, the results of my overtime work that saved the $20 million deal. No company property, just my own thoughts, strategies, and ideas that they had stubbornly rejected until they brought resounding success. Then I checked my email. And there it was, a letter from the VP of Operations at Cascade. My heart raced. Looking forward to our meeting next week, Olivia. I want to discuss the prospects of long-term cooperation. You played a key role in our success. Thank you again. I hadn't replied yet. I needed to focus on something else, making sure tomorrow would be etched in their memories forever. The next morning, I woke up long before dawn, even though I hadn't set an alarm. Damn old habits. My body, like a loyal dog, still awaited the morning check-in, the familiar commute, the frantic pace of projects. But the house was unusually quiet. My walls seemed to look at me in a new way. Not a prison, but rather a clean, untouched canvas. I made coffee as if in slow motion. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing anywhere. No business suit thrown over the back of a chair, no laptop bag waiting by the door, no annoying swarm of Slack notifications. Just me, the light from the kitchen window, and a phone that seemed to have gone crazy, vibrating since I left yesterday. I scrolled through the notifications, 5 LinkedIn messages from former colleagues, full of unspoken questions, 2 emails from clients, 1 from Cascade, and a voicemail from Julia, one of our partner managers. Her voice sounded worried. Heard something happened. Please call me back when you have a minute. Their confusion was understandable. Firing the person who had just pulled off the biggest deal was absurd. Unless, of course, they knew the truth about what I had actually done. I sank into a chair with my notebook in hand, my personal treasure, which I never left at the office. It contained invaluable information, all the quirks of our clients, every fleeting remark, every unspoken promise that escaped the attention of others. For 11 years, I hadn't just managed accounts. I built bridges of trust. I knew which VPs had children going to college, which purchasing managers were allergic to certain suppliers, who preferred meetings on Mondays, and who avoided them like the plague. I wasn't just a consultant, I was a vital artery, and they had coldly severed it, as if removing a minor wart. They naively believed that my value was exhausted by that very folder that Ethan had casually slid across the table to me. How wrong they were. At precisely 9 a.m., my call went out to Cascade Systems. No general lines, no support services. I dialed the coveted cell phone number of Owen Griffith, the VP who had recently scheduled a meeting with me for next week. He answered almost instantly, on the second ring. Olivia, hello. Is our meeting on Tuesday still on? This was my moment. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about, I said in an even voice, trying to hide the storm inside. As of yesterday, I no longer work at Hartley & Knox. And deafening silence hung in the air, so much so that it seemed I could hear Owen raise his eyebrows in surprise. What? He finally breathed. I was fired, I explained impassively. The company is changing course, betting on young blood, new management. I wanted you to hear it from me personally. That's just unbelievable, he exclaimed. You were the only reason we didn't break off the deal last month. You saved everything. I appreciate that, Owen. I really do. But what now? Who will take over my projects? I suppose Ethan will contact you or someone from his new team. I no longer have access to the information. Silence enveloped us again. Olivia, can I ask you something? You're not going to leave the industry, are you? Not a chance, I replied without hesitation. I just haven't decided where I'll continue yet. Listen, I wanted to talk not about that meeting on Tuesday, but about something else, a more long-term perspective. Can you meet today? A smile bloomed on my face. Of course. We met at a secluded bistro in the West Loop. No business suits, no presentation folders, just two people with too much unsaid hanging between them. Owen got straight to the point. We're thinking of bringing some strategic functions in-house, he began. The consulting fees are just insane, and frankly, the only person at HNK we've ever truly trusted was you. Have you ever thought about going out on your own? The word own hung in the air like a heavy weight. Going out on my own? For years, I'd operated as a one-person company, but under someone else's flag. I had created systems, closed deals, built relationships they could never replicate. And they let me go because I didn't fit their new energy. I stared into Owen's eyes, and the words left my lips with a firmness I didn't expect. If I go out on my own, would Cascade be open to a direct consulting agreement? He didn't flinch, not a flicker of doubt on his face. Develop a proposal. Make it real. That evening, I opened my laptop with trepidation and dove into the dreams buried beneath a pile of corporate reports and meetings. My name, my idea, my essence, not just a cog in a giant machine, but something more. As if possessed, I registered an LLC, scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, a business specialist I'd met at a client event. He owed me a favor. With trembling fingers, I dialed Priya, my former assistant, and asked with hope in my voice if she would consider freelance work. Her answer was like music, just tell me when to start. By 9 o'clock that evening, I had everything, a name, a legal structure, a clear plan of action. I wasn't just going to survive, I was going to build something Ethan could never understand. Because my strength isn't in Harley and Knox logos, or in flawless presentations. My strength is in me, in my reputation, in my accomplishments, in the loyalty of my clients. They don't believe in slides and brand colors, they believe in me. The sun mercilessly burst through the kitchen window, highlighting every speck of dust, as if urging me into action. I sat chained to the table with a cup of scalding coffee and a notebook filled with names. Not just names, entire lives, intertwined in a web of relationships, forged in sleepless nights, in the crucible of crises and brainstorming sessions where compensation took a back seat. There was no room for haste. Every call was worth its weight in gold. Every word had to convey confidence, not desperation. First things first, a call not to a client. A call to someone who knew the rules of the game, someone like me, a former mentor, and now, an old friend. Olivia, Rebecca Sterling's voice was warm, but there was a hint of caution in it. Word gets around. Ethan decided to go all in, I see. That's putting it mildly, I replied, trying to remain calm. He fired me. Said the company needed young blood. A long pause. He actually said that? There was shock in Rebecca's voice. Was she kidding? Word for word. She exhaled loudly. Well, consider it a gift. You realize that, don't you? Yes, I replied, feeling a fire ignite within me. I'm starting my own business. Nothing huge yet. But Cascade is already interested. They want to be my first client. Rebecca laughed, and her laughter sounded genuine. Of course, they do. You practically rebuilt their entire Western division. You know what I need from you? Advice. And maybe someday, a recommendation. But for now, just that. If people ask where you've gone, what will you tell them? I'll say Hartley and Knox just lit the fuse that will blow their client base to hell, I retorted, feeling confidence strengthen in my voice. I'm in your corner, Olivia, all the way. 97%. Fire away, anytime, anywhere. The conversation seemed to bring me back down to earth. It reminded me that my career wasn't about favors or office politics. It was about results. And trust. I hung up, took a deep breath, and dialed my first client. Darren McBain from Data Partners. I'd managed their account for 7 years, helped them with their first merger, pulled them out of a nasty cybersecurity incident, and most recently advised them on their European market entry. He answered on the third ring, Olivia. I was just about to call you. Is our international call on Tuesday still on? I swallowed, feeling my throat dry. Actually, that's why I'm calling. I no longer work for Hartley and Knox. There was a ringing silence. What? As of today? The company's changing direction. I was let go. There was complete astonishment in Darren's voice. Olivia, this is just absurd. You've always been our key person. You know every screw in our system. I wanted you to hear it from me before it's officially announced. I have no idea who will be managing your account now. But I assure you, he won't know a tenth of what I do. Sighing, I added, and here's what I'll tell you. I'm opening my own consulting firm. Small, private, very selective. Do you take clients? Only the ones I believe in. He didn't hesitate for a second. Send me a proposal by tomorrow. By evening, I had made 6 more calls. Each one was a measured, thoughtful conversation. And each time I encountered the same reaction, first confusion, then concern, and finally, keen interest. They weren't just surprised I was leaving. They were shocked that Hartley and Knox had let me go without a plan. And there wasn't one. They hadn't just removed me from projects, they had severed the very connections that held those projects together. And with quiet dignity, I was reclaiming what they had so carelessly discarded. That night, my phone buzzed with a message. It was Priya, my former assistant. Priya, internal panic. Julia says it's a madhouse in there. Apparently, 2 clients had already requested new account managers. One had even threatened to terminate their contract. I remained silent, not replying. Just stared at the screen, letting the news sink in. The gears in my head began to spin at a furious pace. I poured myself a glass of full-bodied wine and reopened my laptop. I found a designer on Fiverr who created simple, yet impactful logos. I didn't need anything flashy, just clarity, professionalism, and trust. Olivia Bennett Consulting. Simple, elegant, to the point. I scheduled a meeting, drafted my first non-disclosure agreement, adapted a service proposal template. I wasn't just looking for clients, I was laying a solid foundation for something meaningful, something lasting. And when I opened my email, there was a message from someone I never expected to hear from so soon. Olivia, just spoke with Ethan. He said Allison will be our new point of contact. I told him we need time to think about it. Let's discuss tomorrow. I reread the message twice, as if not believing my eyes. Allison, that 25-year-old upstart, a junior consultant once pompously dubbed a breath of fresh air, the very same Allison I had personally coached before her first client meeting. Ethan, it seemed, was completely unaware of the bomb he had just detonated. Tomorrow, he would find out. By Thursday morning, the Cascade Systems fallout was in full swing. I was being bombarded, 2 voicemails, 4 emails, and even a cryptic LinkedIn message from a colleague still languishing at Hartley and Knox. Whatever you did, they're in a panic. Are you okay? I was more than okay. Cascade Systems had requested a suspension of all active projects. Easton Dater had already sent me their first letter of intent, and 2 smaller firms, clients I hadn't even had a chance to contact, had reached out on their own, stating they preferred working with someone they trusted. In each of their voices was a confidence that money couldn't buy. I didn't just feel good, I felt triumphant. This wasn't a rebellion, but a quiet, imperceptible erosion. a slow, but certain dismantling. And it was only the beginning. At 11:30 a.m., I was sitting across from Owen Griffith of Cascade in their office, in the heart of the city. Not as a representative of Hartley and Knox, not as a service provider, but as simply me. He ushered me into a stark, impersonal conference room, carefully closed the door behind us, and folded his arms across his chest, as if preparing for an interrogation. They actually fired you?" There was genuine amazement in his voice. I nodded silently, trying not to betray the storm raging inside. "After everything you did for them with the San Diego expansion?" He couldn't believe it. "Supposedly. I don't fit into their new direction," I replied in an even, almost colorless voice. Owen sank heavily into the chair opposite me and shook his head in disbelief. There was outrage in his eyes. "They sent us this. Allison." She didn't even bother to review the contract terms, showed up with a completely irrelevant presentation, and managed to call our COO Andrew. "His name is Anthony." I barely suppressed a pained sigh. It was an unrecoverable failure. A crude, unforgivable mistake. "I didn't come here to sell you anything, Owen," I assured him, looking directly into his eyes. "I just wanted to be honest. I'm starting my own firm. Small, personal, focused on clients who value strategy, not empty showmanship." He leaned forward, his gaze becoming piercing and interested. "And how soon can you start?" By noon, we were already discussing the main points of a 6-month consulting agreement. No aggression, no sudden moves. Just a smooth, controlled exit from one company and a transition to something simpler, more direct, and honest. They craved continuity, and I was offering it to them, seamlessly, instantly, with the same level of care they had come to expect. As I was leaving, my hand already on the doorknob, Owen blocked my path. "You realize this is going to cause a storm," he said with a heavy sigh. "Perfectly," I replied, trying to remain calm. "But I didn't start this storm. I'm just answering their challenge." He nodded briefly but firmly, his gaze conveying both sympathy and admiration. "Know that whatever it costs, they made a huge mistake underestimating you. I always saw it." Back home, I leaned back in my chair and opened my laptop. 2 new emails in my inbox. The first, from the lawyers at Hartley and Knox, with a cold, formal subject line, "Reminder regarding confidential information." The text dripped with the venom of veiled threats. "We remind you that your employment agreement contains standard confidentiality provisions. Any interaction with current clients must strictly comply with these provisions." Each word screamed of a desire to intimidate, suppress, force me to back down. The second email was from Allison herself. The subject seemed innocent, quick question. Inside, however, lurked a veiled jab. "Hi, Olivia. Hope you're doing well. Listen, could you remind me which template was used for the Cascade Quarterly Comparative Analysis Report? I've searched the entire shared drive but can't find it. Thanks in advance." I smirked. The game had begun. I stared at the message. It wasn't entirely her fault. Rather, she had simply been thrown into the deep end, into a situation for which she was completely unprepared. All for the sake of the elusive fresh energy. And yet, I remained silent. Anything I said now would sound like a lecture, and this was a lesson that someone else needed to teach her. Closing my email, I typed a message to Priya. "Priya, let's prepare 2 new client onboarding this week. Tomorrow, I'm taking you with me to Cascade and Easton Dater. Together." Another message followed. "Priya, I'm on it. Heard from Julia again. Sounds like complete chaos over there. Clients are demanding meetings. The CEO inquired why your name disappeared from all internal planning documents." The corner of my lip twitched in a smirk. That question would plague them for a long time. Later, as the day was drawing to a close, I went to Lincoln Park to clear my head. The lake was serene, like a mirror. The city around me hummed, teeming with life, each person absorbed in their own concerns, unaware that a small but significant change had just occurred in an office building nearby. At 4:17 p.m., my phone rang. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Olivia Bennett, I answered, trying to remain calm. Silence hung in the air, and then a voice, Olivia? This is Garrett Myers, from Hartley and Knox. I raised an eyebrow, feeling the tension building inside. Hello, Garrett. How can I help you? My voice was even, but a sense of unease had already settled in my stomach. We've received some feedback from clients, he began. It seems some transitions aren't going as smoothly as we'd like. I was wondering if you'd be interested in a consulting agreement? Just for a few weeks, to help us streamline the process. I tried to keep my tone polite and neutral, even though everything inside me was boiling. Unfortunately, I already have existing contracts with two of my former clients. Taking on new obligations right now would simply be inappropriate. A steely note entered Garrett's voice. Olivia, we wouldn't want this to escalate. It won't, I retorted, as long as the company respects my resignation and acknowledges my rights under the agreement we both signed. I felt my fingers tighten around the phone. Again, there was a long, oppressive silence. I understand, he finally said. Thank you for your time. I hung up, feeling my hands trembling. Getting up, I went outside and sat on a bench overlooking the lake. Its calm surface seemed deceptive. This was their first warning shot. The first attempt to regain control. But what they didn't yet understand. I hadn't just cut ties. I built a bridge, one that clients were already crowding, ready to rush across. By Friday morning, I had 4 major players in my portfolio: Cascade Systems, Easton Data, Langford and Re, and now BXL Bio. And you know what? Not one of them came at my initiative. No one pressured them. They reached out themselves. As soon as the whisper spread through the industry, what happened to Olivia Bennett? I didn't need to sing my own praises. I simply responded, calmly, restrainedly, professionally. I no longer work at Hartley and Knox. I've started my own consulting firm. Yes, I'm open to working with you on an independent basis. Simple truths, but they were what sowed real chaos in Hartley and Knox. That morning, Priya forwarded me another message from Julia. Subject, internal status. Ethan called an emergency meeting this morning. At least 5 clients have frozen contract renewals or are demanding replacement contacts. The lawyers are frantically searching for loopholes to force them to comply. The non-solicitation clause, it raised eyebrows, but given my dismissal, an ominous uncertainty hung over everything. The COO is furious, and so is the board, I gathered. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a long, weary sigh. To destroy the company? That wasn't my intention. Sensationalism? Not sought. But to apologize for being an indispensable asset they so ineptly undervalued? Never. At 11:30 a.m., an invitation from Ethan Carter popped up in my calendar. Subject, let's talk. Just us. Time, 3 p.m. Location, Hartley and Knox, Conference Room 6B, Courage. I didn't accept, didn't decline. Instead, I spent the next hour meticulously rereading every paragraph of my resignation letter. And there it was, clear, concise, legally sound. The company waives enforcement of the non-compete clause in the event of involuntary termination. They signed it. Initialed it. Just didn't bother to read closely enough. At 1:01 p.m., my phone rang again. Owen from Cascade. Hey, just a heads up, he said in a hushed tone. Ethan contacted us this morning. You're stirring up trouble, Olivia, and our contract now makes us legally vulnerable, he blurted out as if I'd committed treason. I blinked, disbelieving. He actually said that, I thought. Yes, I asked him to put it in writing, I retorted, savoring his discomfiture. He immediately backpedaled, as if jolted by electricity. I smirked inwardly. Thanks for letting me know, I said, masking my triumph. No problem, he mumbled. By the way, 2 colleagues at CH are looking for support. They wanted to know who's advising us. Is it okay to pass along your information? Are you kidding me? I exclaimed, unable to suppress the sarcasm. Absolutely, pass it along. By 2:30 p.m., I was on a Zoom call with the head of strategy at MB Tech. They were mired in restructuring and had just shown their previous consulting firm the door due to a blatant conflict of interest. 40 minutes into the conversation, she promised to send me a draft contract by Monday. Victory! No sooner had I ended the call than a new voicemail popped up. Ethan. I pressed play. Olivia, it's Ethan, his voice said, this time dripping with deference. I would really appreciate it if we could talk today. Not about the past, but about alignment. Maybe there's a way we can move forward together. There was a desperate hope in his voice, and I barely suppressed a smile. It seemed someone realized they'd made a massive mistake. For the greater good. I deleted the message because alignment was precisely the word he'd used to cloak my ouster. And now he wanted it back? At 4:05 p.m., my personal phone rang. Julia. Olivia, she whispered urgently, this isn't from me, but Veriton Capital is out. I went cold. Out how? That private equity group that was going to buy Hartley and Knox. It was all top secret, negotiations had been going on for months. They had conditions, strong client loyalty and continuity. And now, because of your departure and all this mess, they withdrew their offer this morning. I leaned back in my chair, utterly stunned. So that's it? I whispered. They never said it openly, Julia replied, but yes, they wanted the company to look leaner, remove potential bottlenecks, centralize power. I was too closely tied to too many clients. That's why they got rid of me, I realized, feeling a slow burn rise inside. I hope someone stays, I whispered, but the clients, like frightened birds, had scattered. No, I thought, they didn't stay. That evening, I dialed Garrett Myers, the CEO who had once cautioned me against rash actions. He answered on the second ring. Olivia, I heard about Veriton, I said, trying to remain calm, though a storm raged within. It was, perhaps, the hardest call of my life. A long pause. You shouldn't have done this, his voice said quietly, full of reproach. I merely finished what you started, I retorted, putting steel into every word. You played. You lost. I simply stepped aside and watched the house of cards collapse. He sighed heavily. You could come back. We could. No, I interrupted, not giving hope a single chance. You had years to appreciate what I built, but you preferred a young face and a cheap signature. It's over. Silence on the other end. I continued, not giving him a chance to recover. Tell Ethan I won't be at the 3 o'clock meeting. Now I have my own clients, and unlike yours, they trust me. With those words, I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of resentment and disappointment slowly lift from my shoulders. 3 weeks after my dismissal. My name was on client contracts more often than the top 3 consultants at Hartley and Knox combined. Not because I begged for the honor, but because the clients themselves decided so. Not out of pity, not as a protest, but because I was damn good at my job. Because I answered calls even after 8 in the evening, because I remembered details that wouldn't fit into any CRM system, because I made sure things didn't have to be repeated twice. Trust isn't bought with a logo, it's earned through consistency. And finally, they saw the difference. In the second month, my company was growing like wildfire, even faster than I had anticipated. Admittedly, too fast. Priya was now working full-time, and I had just hired another project coordinator. Marcus. A smart, charming guy I had trained a long time ago who had escaped corporate slavery 6 months earlier. We were crammed into a small co-working space in River North. No corner offices with glass walls, no. The boardroom had an atmosphere of quiet efficiency, just 3 tables, consistently excellent coffee. Cascade extended its contract for another year. Easton launched a second project. Blee signed a 3-month strategic mandate with a verbal agreement for further collaboration, and the email was bursting with messages. Referral from Owen Griffith. Are you still accepting new clients? Can we talk? I need someone I can trust. I was turning down more requests than I was accepting. Not out of arrogance, no, but out of firm intention. I wasn't aiming to build an empire. I was building something solid, something that belonged only to me, something that could no longer be taken away. And then, one morning, I opened LinkedIn and saw a message: Hartley and Knox announces a change in leadership. Ethan Carter is stepping down as managing director with immediate effect. Interim leadership will be appointed while the company enters a restructuring phase following the loss of several key clients. I stared at the screen for a long time, but not with satisfaction. Not with triumph, but in silence. He was just gone. The same one who declared that I was no longer the right energy for their company. Who naively believed that charisma could replace genuine trust. I remember him sliding that folder across the lacquered table, confident that I would meekly disappear, fade into oblivion. He just didn't see, couldn't see. People like him never see. That day, a courier delivered an envelope. No return address. Inside, just a handwritten note: Olivia, you were right. It's not just about the clients, but about the relationships you built. I never understood the difference. I hope you create something bigger than we ever did. Have you already? I mechanically folded the note and threw it into the desk drawer. Not out of sentimentality, I just needed to put a period at the end. Some lessons don't require answers. And 3 days later, I was standing at the podium at the Women in Leadership Summit. The very conference where I used to sit modestly in the back row. Now I was the keynote speaker. The topic of my speech: if your true value has not been recognized, and why it ultimately doesn't matter. I told this story with crystal clarity, without a hint of bitterness or revenge, just the dry facts. I talked about what happens when companies put ostentatious image above real results, when they measure freshness by youth rather than wisdom, when they trade loyalty for fleeting brilliance. I concluded my speech with words that cut through the silence of the hall: perhaps, one day, you will encounter someone who no longer sees value in you. Don't panic, don't humiliate yourself by begging. Just smile, reach out your hand, and take with you everything he never realized you created. Your good name, your impeccable reputation, your unwavering principles. Because some things don't fit on glossy business cards. They are engraved in the hearts of those who trust you. The hall erupted in applause. Long, deafening, turning into a standing ovation. But what followed was much more important. 6 women, with tears in their eyes, approached me. 2 asked me to be their mentor, to guide them through the thorns of career decisions. 1 confessed that she was planning to leave a company that had been draining her life force for years. Another, with eyes burning with delight, offered an investment if I ever thought about expanding my business. And 1, a quiet woman about 50 years old, just. She breathed a sigh of relief: thank you. This was exactly what I needed.